Last detail, better make sure I put the clock out here. Well, we will be returning to 1 Kings today. I'd like to start just by asking you to consider, do you ever feel as you're going out about in life, whether that be your personal situation, whether it be work, whether it be the tri-state area, the U.S., the world, that you just look out and you feel confused? Confused as to what our place is in it. Sometimes it can just seem like too much. You look out and you see the complexities of even individual lives and even individual families. And sometimes we look at this and we say, I don't even know where to start picking at the knot to figure this out. Is there a real way that I can even have an impact in this area? And sometimes the way forward in life can seem so hard. Even as a fully committed Christian, to know how, Lord, what can I do here? Because sometimes things are easy, don't rob the bank, don't kill your spouse, but there are other situations that are, that resonated a little too strong there, Sandy. John, watch it. But life is complex, and I think sometimes we can oversimplify it. I think a lot of times we oversimplify it, and really, God is capable of giving us a task to perform and a job to do, His image to bear in the world. Whether that is something that we can see a way forward, or whether we can't, God is still in control, and He still is our God, and He is using us, and He has something for us to do, because we are His children, here representing Him. So where is God when it's scary and weird and hard and things are messed up? The answer is He's still where He has always been. He is here, He is present, and He is working, and He has drawn us out for Himself. Okay, that's it. You can go. No, that's the introduction. Our sermon for today is titled, Who's in Charge Here? Embracing Our Identity as Children of God. And just as by way of reminder, we're diving back into the storyline this week. Last week, we began by noting the history of Israel and how it had been, of course, Israel was brought up from Egypt, brought in to drive out the Canaanites, to conquer Canaan, drive out the Canaanites, a mixture of those two. And Canaan was a wicked place. Evil things were being done, harmful things were being done, and God was bringing Israel up as a judgment against Canaan. So then Israel was meant to be this light, was meant to be a place that showed the nations around what it means to live as God's people, what loving kindness actually looks like lived out in the world, what justice looks like lived out in the world. And as we know, that fell apart. They did not do this. They did not remain faithful. And we saw Israel split between Israel in the north and Judah in the south. And we came into the story last week with King Ahab. And Ahab things had fallen so much apart, and he had become such a typical ancient Near Eastern king that he had even married into the Sidonian royal lineage. He had married Jezebel. And she was, like I said, a Sidonian, and he brought in Baal worship into the nation of Israel. And of course, we knew they always struggled with these sorts of things. But specifically in chapter 16, it says, and in verse 31, as if it had been a light thing for him to walk in the sins of Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, he took for his wife Jezebel, the daughter of Ethbaal, king of the Sidonians, and went and served Baal and worshipped him. He erected an altar for Baal in the house of Baal, which he built in Samaria. And Ahab made an Asherah. Ahab did more to provoke the Lord, the God of Israel, to anger than all the kings of Israel who were before him. And we talked about the damage that this had brought to the nation of Israel. And just by way of review, again, this Baal worship, this was a fertility religion that involved a lot of sexual deviance and mutilation, bodily harm, and ultimately sacrifice, human sacrifice, even children being offered up to guarantee that the fertility would be, that the land would be fertile as they wanted it to be. And so we had this cycle in the storyline of the myth, that would be the yearly routine of what was expected in the land. If things were good and the land was fertile, Baal was successful. And when things got dry and bad, that meant Baal was losing to Mot, the god of death, and he was dead under Mot's authority. And then Baal would eventually would come back to power, come back to life, and it's complicated stories and all this. But this is the god that they were under, bringing violence and degradation, death, to the land. This land that should have been a bright light to those around them, showing them the one true God, instead became a land of darkness, a land where they were suffering themselves and projecting to the world that this is just how this is. This is how you worship. This is how you gain power or help your God to produce, for the land to be productive as it is. And so we saw that Elijah just comes on the scene and says, hey, it's not going to rain by my word. He just comes up on the scene, verse 1 of chapter 17. As the Lord, the God of Israel lives, before whom I stand, there shall be neither dew nor rain these years, except by my word. Of course, then God takes him, hides him by the brook Cherith, and provides for him there. So the rest of the land is going through drought, going through this hardship, and God is providing the needs of Elijah, both with the brook and then with the birds of the air, bringing him food. But then he sends him into the area of Sidon, to Zarephath, which belongs to Sidon. And he provided a widow to provide for him here. And we found her at the very point of death. She was gathering sticks to make her last meal for her and her son. And then she was just, I'm going to die now. But we saw that Elijah says, well, make some for me first. And gives her this guarantee that the food's not going to run out. And so he stays with her. And God miraculously, in the midst of Baal's land, this god of fertility, Baal's failing, and Yahweh right in Baal's house is providing for his prophet and for this widow who is providing for Elijah through the provision of Yahweh. And then ultimately here at the end, we saw that the widow's son dies, and Elijah brings his cry before the Lord, and the Lord resurrects this child's life. And we see then at the end, in verse 24, the woman said to Elijah, now I know that you are a man of God, that the word of the Lord in your mouth is truth. And so we saw physical life and spiritual life all restored in this land of Baal, who had, in their thinking, if the drought has come, if it's not productive, he's under the power of death. Well, here we have God provide what Baal couldn't, and we have God conquer death in bringing up this child. And so we see that here in this faraway place, we see Elijah accomplishing this big thing of standing up to the king and saying it's not going to rain. And then we see him also, God is at work in this little detail of this widow. And we left last week with the reminder that we need to be paying attention to the big things, but we also then need to be paying attention to all those around us, to have a heart for the people. We never know where God is at work and is going to do great things. So in chapter 18, we come to another great thing. Elijah's going to pop back on the scene. I'm going to begin reading in verse 1 of chapter 18. After many days, the word of the Lord came to Elijah in the 3rd year, saying, go, show yourself to Ahab, and I will send rain upon the earth. So this has been 3 years and no rain. And now here's the moment. Go show yourself to Ahab, and I will send rain upon the earth. So Elijah went to show himself to Ahab. Now the famine was severe in Samaria, and Ahab called Obadiah, who was over the household. Now I want us to pay attention to Obadiah. Let's parenthetical note here. Now Obadiah feared the Lord greatly. So he knows who's God, and he is his servant. His name, Obadiah, is servant of Yahweh. Now Obadiah feared the Lord greatly. And when Jezebel cut off the prophets of the Lord, means killed them, Obadiah took 100 prophets and hid them by 50s in a cave and fed them with bread and water. Think about what that means. Okay, for one, this lets you know how far off Israel is from the divine desire for them, for what they were meant to be in the midst of the land. This is a place where the king's wife has the authority to go ahead and cut off, hunt these prophets down and kill them. And Obadiah, who's working, he's the servant of the king here. He's over his household. He serves Yahweh. And this is one of those complicated situations that I was referring to in the introduction here. What do you do when you greatly fear the Lord, you serve him, and you're in Israel, you're in this nation that belongs to Yahweh, and this king is this wicked king? How do you serve? What do you do? Do you run away? It's like, I can't be involved with this person at all. Do I run off to another country? Well, it gets complicated. But he does what he can. And the idea of hiding 100 men by 50s in a cave, imagine the process of bringing these guys bread and water in the midst of a famine, in the midst of a drought. He's not doing small work here. Obadiah is doing powerful work here, but in the background, all under the king's nose. So this is just a beautiful, beautiful example of blooming where you're planted, of being stuck where you are. Probably doesn't have the authority to get out from underneath Ahab, aside from just running. and who knows if they'd be able to track you down. But he stays where he is and does what he can in the midst of the situation where he is. This complicated, horrible situation really to be mourned. He's there and awake and understanding that God has a job for him. In verse 5, Ahab said to Obadiah, "Go through the land to all the springs of water, and to all the valleys. Perhaps we may find grass and save the horses and mules alive and not lose some of the animals." Remember, the horses, these are important for battle. You know, the mules is important for farm work. Maybe a similar situation is if we just ran out of oil. All of a sudden, our cars become expensive statues. You know, this is a big deal. So he's like, let's find springs of water. Let's save the animals, save these horses. So they divided the land between them to pass through it. Ahab went in one direction by himself, and Obadiah went in another direction by himself. And as Obadiah was on the way, behold, Elijah met him. And Obadiah recognized him and fell on his face and said, "Is it you, my lord Elijah?" Remember, Elijah's been hiding out. Nobody knows where he is. And he answered him, "It is I. Go tell your Lord, behold, Elijah is here." Now, I want you to just pay attention to Obadiah here, because this may sound a little bit different than what you expected after hearing this heroic spy guy story of him taking care of the prophets. Hear him, but I encourage you to have compassion on him for where he is. I think there's something for us to learn here. He answered him, "It is I. Go tell your Lord, behold, Elijah is here." And he said, "How have I sinned, that you would give your servant into the hand of Ahab to kill me?" Let's let you know, Ahab's no joke, okay? "As the Lord your God lives, there is no nation or kingdom where my Lord has not sent to seek you." And when they would say, "He is not here," he would take an oath of the kingdom or nation that they had not found you. And now you say, "Go tell your Lord, behold, Elijah is here. And as soon as I have gone from you, the Spirit of the Lord will carry you, I know not where." He totally has faith that Yahweh's able to do what Yahweh wants to do. And he's like, "I don't know, Elijah, God may have another job for you somewhere else. And I'm going to go get the king. I'm going to bring him back here. You're not going to be here. And I'm toast." So, it's hidden in the Hebrew there. Kidding. Oh. Well hidden, yeah. Where are we at? Yeah, he says, "Now say, go tell your Lord, behold, Elijah is here. As soon as I have gone from you, the Spirit of the Lord will carry you, I know not where. And so when I come and tell Ahab, and he cannot find you, he will kill me. Although I, your servant, have feared the Lord from my youth. Has it not been told, my Lord, what I did when Jezebel killed the prophets of the Lord? How I hid 100 men of the Lord's prophets by 50s in a cave and fed them with bread and water? And now you say, go tell your Lord, behold, Elijah is here, and he will kill me." Boy, what a big verbal statement. It's just like, he's scared for his life. And Elijah said, "As the Lord of hosts lives, before whom I stand, I will surely show myself to him today." I just think Elijah's so patient here. It's not a big rebuke of Obadiah's faith or anything like this. He's just like, hey, it's okay. I will be here. So Obadiah went to meet Ahab and told him, and Ahab went to meet Elijah. First main point I want to make this morning is God is at work in us, even in the midst of scary and morally complex situations. Again, God is at work in us, even in the midst of scary and morally complex situations. I think when we look at Obadiah, when we look at that second half of that passage, he did something awesome in taking care of the prophets, something hard to do, something that took so much courage to do. But when you first read that first half, you can imagine he's just some rock hard stalwart, I'm strong in the faith. God's got this sort of person. But then when he responds to Elijah, you see that, to me, it seems a bit of his natural frailty coming through, and he's scared. And what that means to me is, as he's doing this stuff and taking care of the prophets, here's this guy that doesn't have it all together, who's not just all, perfectly firm in what in what's going to happen. He genuinely knows the risks, and by his response here, I think he's probably, if we could see his inner thoughts as he's doing this stuff, he's scared. He knows the situation's hard. He knows he's surrounded by evil, and he's afraid. But he fears Yahweh more than anything. He knows that God is in control. He knows he is the maker of the universe, and he knows the right thing to do. And so he takes this situation that he's in. It's morally complex. He's working for a bad guy in a good kingdom that's becoming bad, and God wants to make it better. And so he's like, you know what I can do? I can not kill prophets. I can hide them. I can take this risk. I can do this. And he does this. And God used him greatly to save 100 men and provide for them. And so I think we really need to understand that our strength lies not in our own selves, not in our own hearts, not in our own gumption, not in our own history. God is able to take someone who doesn't feel naturally fit for it and use them for his glory. And often he chooses to do that very thing so that he can display his power in the midst of weakness, so that our faith is in him rather than in ourselves. I think, I won't go over all the details today, but John and I both in our histories had moments where we were just absolutely sure, we'll serve God in whatever way he's called us, but he definitely doesn't want us to speak. He definitely doesn't want us to be pastors. And yet here we are. And this is a joy for me. And the Lord uses this in my life, and I hope he's using it in yours. God's the one in control. God's the one who calls us. God's the one who gives us the abilities. He gives us his spirit and the ability to carry forth his will in the world. So I have no doubt, and I know some of your lives in detail, some of them not. Your lives are complicated. And they're like mine. They're complicated with sin. They're complicated with family relationships. They're complicated with work. And all sorts of these webs of a fallen world tangled up inside of us. But the Spirit of God is active. He's living, and he is working in the midst of our hearts, and he has a job for us to do. So, yep, life is scary. Yep, it's morally complex. But God is at work, and we are his children, and he is at work in us. So take courage from Obadiah. You can be sitting here knowing the costs and scared of the costs and still do what's right because your faith is in Yahweh. So moving on then. We have Ahab meeting Elijah. Verse 17, when Ahab saw Elijah, Ahab said to him, "Is it you, you troubler of Israel?" And he answered, Elijah's a bold man. Here, anyway. 18, and he answered, "I have not troubled Israel, but you have, and your father's house, because you have abandoned the commandments of the Lord and followed the Baals. Now, therefore send and gather all Israel to me at Mount Carmel, and the 450 prophets of Baal and the 400 prophets of Asherah who eat at Jezebel's table." In this, and of course this is Elijah's, it's not something worked up within him. This is the Spirit of the Lord using Elijah. He is Yahweh's prophet. And of course, Ahab was the one who has brought Baal worship to Israel in this big official form. Elijah has said, I'm not going to, we're going to hold back the rain. He's the one. He should know. It's like, okay, we started worshiping Baal and the rain cut off. Well, who's at fault here? It should be you. You're God's man. You're the king of Israel. You should know. You should be aware of this. But Ahab is so committed to his ancient Near Eastern worldview and the status quo, the zeitgeist, that he sees Elijah as the problem. And Elijah is just putting it squarely, exactly how it is. You have brought trouble to Israel. So gather up these prophets that you should have, if he was following Deuteronomic law, There shouldn't have been 450 of them be able to show up, or 400 of Asherah. These false prophets who were leading the people astray were meant to be killed. The number never should have been that high. So going then to verse 20. So Ahab sent to all the people of Israel and gathered the prophets together at Mount Carmel. And Elijah came near to all the people and said, "How long will you go limping between two different opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him. But if Baal, then follow him." And the people did not answer him a word. Then Elijah said to the people, "I, even I only, am left a prophet of the Lord." So, thinking he's probably talking about at least those openly, if we're thinking about the 100 that are hidden in the caves, or in the cave. "I, even I only, am left a prophet of the Lord. But Baal's prophets are 450 men. Let 2 bulls be given to us, and let them choose 1 bull for themselves, and cut it in pieces and lay it on the wood, but put no fire to it. And I will prepare the other bull and lay it on the wood, and put no fire to it. And you call upon the name of your God, and I will call upon the name of the Lord. And the God who answers by fire, he is God." And all the people answered, "It is well spoken." Then Elijah said to the prophets of Baal, "Choose for yourselves 1 bull and prepare it first, for you are many. And call upon the name of your God, but put no fire to it." So he's giving them all of this advantage. You're more than me. You go first. You're the guys that have won politically. Show that Baal is God. So, verse 26. "And they took the bull that was given them, and they prepared it, and called upon the name of Baal from morning until noon, saying, 'O Baal, answer us!' But there was no voice, and no one answered. And they limped around the altar that they had made." And of course, the word limp there's some debate about what that means, and is it referring to them, basically they're going all day long at this, and their fury, trying to call down the fire from Baal, and they're tired? Or is this a word referring to the form of whatever dance they were doing? Whatever's going on. They're morning to noon, calling and calling and calling, limping around the altar. And remember who these people are. These are the guys that will say, "Hey, yeah, this is not going well. You need to sacrifice your child. Come and let's sacrifice your child and make this better." This is the kind of people. These are murderous, violent, vile people who were leading the people astray. So with Elijah's next move, he's not just being a jerk. He's doing something very important here. So they're crying and crying out to this violent God. Verse 27, "And at noon, Elijah mocked them, saying, 'Cry aloud, for he is a god. Either he is musing, or he is relieving himself, or he is on a journey, or perhaps he is asleep and must be awakened.'" I want to go, not for too long of a rabbit trail here, but I want to go to the Hebrew here. There's a little bit of a discussion about that second phrase, if it means, actually the first and second phrase, if it means he's relieving himself. Both words, it has like a literal meaning of like going aside. And so not all dictionaries do this, but one of the top dictionaries, both the first phrase and the second phrase in that, they both look at it and say, after giving the literal definitions, they both are like, this might be a euphemism for defecation. So this particular, the Dictionary of Classical Hebrew is particularly thinking, I really think he's talking about poop somewhere in there. And I want to make one more note. There's a little bit of a rhyming lilt to the Hebrew that I want you to hear. When he says, "Cry aloud, for he is a god," and either he is musing or he's relieving himself. There's different ways to say things, and he could have done it differently than he did. But how he chooses to say this, when he says, "Cry aloud," it's a kiru bakol gavol. He's doing a little bit of rhyming here. Then when he gets to, for he is musing or he is relieving himself, in verse 27, in Hebrew it's kisiach lo. So it's like bakol gavol, for he is a god. Kisig, to me, if he really is talking about him going to the bathroom here, it's like, this rhyme sort of idea. It's like, he's supposing, maybe he's supposing, or maybe he's indisposing, Or maybe he's a thinker, or maybe he's a stinker. That's the sort of feel. He's really laying it on thick to these prophets. Because, and the humor's there on purpose, because think of what they're doing. They're worshiping this God who's not even the top one in their pantheon, the guy who's regularly defeated by death and has to be brought back up over and over and over again. He's like, so yeah, your God's just sort of a lackey here. He's pushed around. So you can take it the bathroom humor way, or even if he's just saying he's turned aside. We'll say that for a minute. You have Elijah saying either he is musing, or he is turned aside, or he is on a journey, or perhaps he is asleep and must be wakened. If they're believing that Baal is trapped by death, he's just sort of working his way around to, maybe he's thinking, well, maybe he's just, distracted off to the side somewhere. Maybe he's traveling. Maybe he's asleep, ... Yeah, you think he's dead. It's sort of like, think about what you think, guys. And of course, then, what do you do if you're the prophet of Baal and no fires come down and the prophet of Yahweh is making fun of you? Verse 28, and they cried aloud and cut themselves after their custom with swords and lances until the blood gushed out upon them. There's an account of El, high god El, in this whole sort of mythology of him plowing furrows in his chest, because Baal has died. So they're probably acting out this mythology and cutting themselves open, hoping to get the attention, hoping to help Baal. And as midday passed, they raved on until the time of the offering of the oblation. But there was no voice. No one answered. No one paid attention. And the Hebrew is a little more explicit, and it's very parallel. There was no voice. There was no answer. There was no attention. Nothing's happening. Second main point then for today is this. If your God is not in control, then he's not worthy of worship. Again, if your God is not in control, then he is not worthy of worship. Now think about what that means, though. That means that the life as it is right now, with all its confusion, with all its weirdness, with all its evil, all of this is in this history that God has laid out for us. That means that whatever we are facing, whatever hardship, whatever evil, it's not a shock to God. God's not defeated somewhere needing our prayers to lift him up. God is overseeing all of this. And if we believe, as we have sang in this song today, that God is good, he is God, he is love, that means wherever you find yourself, there is something for you as a believer in the Lord to be doing for his glory. There is a right way forward. There is a good to do. And he is present and with us because he's not like Baal. And we have to get his attention, where we have to get him rescued, where we have to make him work for us. We are his servants, and he is a good God, and he is in control, and he is working through us. So again, if your God is not in control, then he is not worthy of worship. That goes for any other thing we can substitute as a God. We do have polytheism. We do have religions that are in competition with Christianity and the culture that we live in. But often we tend to let things other than deity capture our attention. It's money, it's power, it's sex, it's our pleasures, all sorts of things that we think will fill this hole in our lives and give us meaning. But that place is for God alone. He is the one to fill this, and he is the one to bring meaning and purpose and genuine love and devotion to our lives. So don't worship these gods who are not in control and live out in the end, and die out in the end. Verse 36. So nobody paid attention. Verse 30. Then Elijah said to all the people, "Come near to me." He wants them to see. Pay close attention to what he's doing. And all the people came near to him, and he repaired the altar of the Lord that had been thrown down. Interestingly, they're not supposed to have altars on the high places worshiping Yahweh, but God uses this It's seeming act of disobedience and worshiping him somewhere other than in Jerusalem, with offering these sacrifices. Elijah even takes this misguided altar to Yahweh and uses it for Yahweh's glory. Remember that moral complexity again? All the people came near to him, and he repaired the altar of the Lord that had been thrown down. Elijah took 12 stones, according to the number of the tribes of the sons of Jacob, to whom the word of the Lord came, saying, Israel shall be your name. He's calling them back to their history, to a unified people. He's calling them who they were meant to be, the one who struggles with God and men, this Israel name that God had bestowed upon Jacob. And with the stones, he built an altar in the name of the Lord. And he made a trench around the altar, as great as would contain 2 seahs of seed. So that's about 14 quarts of, it's not a huge trench, but it'll hold 14 quarts of seed around this sacrificial area. And he put the wood in order and cut the bull in pieces and laid it on the wood. And he said, fill 4 jars with water and pour it on the burnt offering and on the wood. And he said, do it a second time. And they did it a second time. And he said, do it a third time. And they did it a third time, using this precious resource in the midst of drought. He knows the rain's coming. 35, and the water ran around the altar and filled the trench also with water. So this sacrifice is just drenched. So he's let the Baal's prophets go first. He's let them do their thing all day. When it comes to his turn, it's like, wet this down. Come, look, watch what I'm doing. I'm not messing around here. You all see what's happening. I'm even going to soak this sacrifice. Verse 36, and at the time of the offering of the oblation, Elijah the prophet came near and said, note, there's no cutting, there's no dancing, there's nothing. O Lord, God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, let it be known this day that you are God in Israel, and that I am your servant, and that I have done all these things at your word. Do you note the contrast? He's not trying to get Baal to do something for him. He's a man on the mission from Yahweh himself. I'm just a servant doing what I'm told to do. Answer me, O Lord. Answer me, that this people may know that you, O Lord, are God, and that you have turned their hearts back. I love this. He's saying, what you're seeing today, God is working in your hearts. He's turning you back. And this is my plea to all of us here. Every time we open the scriptures, every time we are worshiping together, it's an opportunity for us to take those parts of ourselves that we have let follow after other things and say, God is turning me back. God is turning me back. So here today, he's turning the hearts of Israel back. Okay, so again, no ritual, no nothing. He just calls upon Yahweh, reciting the history of the people. Let them know that you're God, and I'm doing what you told me, and that you're turning them back. Verse 38, then the fire of the Lord fell and consumed the burnt offering. And it's interesting, remember this altar was not something that should have been here anyway, if they were following the will of Yahweh for them. So the fire of the Lord fell and consumed the burnt offering and the wood and the stones and dust and licked up the water that was in the trench. Fireball comes down and it's just gone. All of this as it should be. And when all the people saw it, they fell on their faces and said, the Lord, He is God. The Lord, He is God. And I've told you that Elijah's name means Yahweh is God, but it's in this shortened form. You know, you have Eliyahu is his name, and these people are now crying out, Yahweh hu ha-Elohim. Yahweh hu ha-Elohim. Yahweh, He is God. And Elijah said to them, seize the prophets of Baal. Let not one of them escape. And they seized them. And Elijah brought them down to the brook Kishon and slaughtered them there. Now that might hit us hard, but remember who these men are. Remember the cries of the children. Remember the cries of the mothers. Remember the ruined lives and the damaged psyches of the fathers and the mothers involved in all of this sacrificial system. Remember the degradation, and remember that witness that should have been there to the world, that loving kindness that should have been there to the world, was instead turned into this kingdom of wickedness. And Elijah now does what Ahab should have done and slays them and takes them away. So our last point for today then. We started with point number 1, God is at work in us even in the midst of scary and morally complex situations. Number 2, if your God is not in control, then he is not worthy of worship. And number 3, God is not a genie under our command to grant our wishes. The Lord of all creation is saving the world. It grants us the privilege of participating in his beautiful work of liberation. God is not a genie under our command to grant our wishes. The Lord of all creation is saving the world and grants us the privilege of participating in his beautiful work of liberation. I don't want God to be a genie. I'm not a good judge of what I need. Apart from God, I'm going to desire power, money, sex. My flesh wants all sorts of things. But with the work that God is doing in my heart, he's transformed me, transformed my desires, helped me to see a deeper beauty. He calls us to a deeper understanding of what is happening in the world, and he is working in our hearts the ability to represent him in justice and in love. That God has brought us into his family, and now we have the pleasure of doing what he says. And since he is a good and loving God, what he has for us to do is the best for us. So I don't have to be cooking up a scheme in my own life and asking God to make this work. I'm looking at the scriptures, I'm spending time with his people, and I'm saying, what do you want me to do in Huntington today? What do you want me to do in the tri-state area today? I want to close. Don't worry, I'm not going to preach through the whole passage. I want to go to Romans chapter 8 and take this to a New Testament context and read for us what God has for us in the future and what that means for us in the present, coming from the words, from the lips of Apostle Paul. Verse 18, after dealing with the idea of us being children of God, heirs of God and fellow heirs with Christ. Verse 18, well, and actually I'll read here, provided we suffer with him in order that we may also be glorified with him. Verse 18, he says, for I consider that the sufferings of this present time are not worth comparing with the glory that is to be revealed to us. For the creation waits with eager longing for the revealing of the sons of God. For the creation was subjected to futility, not willingly, but because of him who subjected it, in hope that the creation itself will be set free from its bondage to corruption and obtain the freedom of the glory of the children of God. You and I have a history of being set free, and we have a future of helping in the setting free of creation. 22, for we know that the whole creation has been groaning together in the pains of childbirth until now. And not only the creation, but we ourselves who have the first fruits of the Spirit groan inwardly as we wait eagerly for adoption as sons, the redemption of our bodies. For in this hope we were saved. But he brings us back to the present. Now hope that is seen is not hope. For who hopes for what he sees? But if we hope for what we do not see, we wait for it with patience. Likewise, the Spirit helps us in our weakness, for we do not know what to pray for as we ought. But the Spirit himself intercedes for us with groanings too deep for words. Sometimes we just don't even know what to say. We know it hurts, we know it's hard, and we're confused. And we go to God, and the Spirit himself is interceding for us even when our words fail us. What a beautiful thing. We find ourselves, Obadiah, scared stiff, but yet still able to do what God has called us to do, because the Spirit is interceding for us. Verse 27, and he who searches hearts knows what is the mind of the Spirit, because the Spirit intercedes for the saints according to the will of God. And we know that for those who love God, all things work together for good, for those who were called according to his purpose. For those whom he foreknew, he also predestined to be conformed to the image of his Son, in order that he might be the firstborn among many brothers. And those whom he predestined, he also called, and those whom he called, he also justified, and those whom he justified, he also glorified. This golden chain of redemption is not to be broken. We are going to be what God has called us to be. And so I call upon us all, and for those who may not know the Lord, who may not be committed to him and not place their faith in Jesus Christ. And we don't, believers, we know this. We're not good in and of ourselves. We're part of the chaos. We're part of the problem. We contribute to it. And we still do, even as believers, when we let ourselves be pulled into the ways of the world and the desires of the flesh. But God made satisfaction for our sins. God made the sacrifice for our sins. He appeased his own wrath through the death of Jesus Christ. Christ has conquered death, has conquered sin, and we can be saved from this simply by placing our faith in him, believing he is who he says he is, and he has done what he said he has done, that his sacrifice will cover our sins, will rescue us from the wrath of God. Place your faith in Jesus Christ, and he will grant forgiveness. God will bring you back into the family. God will restore you and give you a future, as he's done for all of us who have believed. Let us never find our meaning. Let us never find our courage. Let us never find the basis for our life in ourselves. Let us find it in the God who loves us enough to send his own Son to live with us, to live among us, to teach us, to die, and to rise again. He has ascended, the Spirit has come, and the work that he is doing will be completed when Jesus comes back and we are completely made new. Let us look forward to that day. God our Father, we thank you that you are our surety. You are in charge. We are not. And we thank you that we